So a long time ago, I remember reading somewhere that one of the advantages of getting old is having old friends. So Joe and I are now this year celebrating, I think, our about 40th anniversary. So if you're young, remember that one advantage of getting old is having old friends. So I'll tell just one anecdote about Joe that's kind of come to my mind. Some IBM trip, and we were flying back together from New York to California, and Joe and Ed Wimmers and myself were sitting. We had like 3 rows. Joe had the middle seat, and each one of us said, "Well, I want to talk to Joe about. I want to talk about knowledge, and Ed about functional programming of some sort." So we had some debate how we're going to do it, and then we finally said, "Let's make it fair. Everybody gets one question." So we spent about 3 or more 4 hours of flying. I would say something, Joe would reply, and Ed would say something functional programming, Joe would reply, and he had to really run 2 conversations kind of dovetailing, and we both had, all of us had a great time. I think Joe really enjoyed flipping kind of question, answer. So today I want to talk about the work that I went and checked, and all the papers I wrote with Joe are all about knowledge. And I want to focus on particular distributed knowledge. First, I want to do a little experiment. This is my phone number. Please take a look, but do not write it down. Okay? So my area is logic and computer science. And when we think about logic, then the topic that comes to mind is you go back all the way to Aristotle, and we have the syllogism, or as Lewis Carroll called them, the syllogisms, and all men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. Okay? Now, somewhere later, actually, the roots you can find them again in Socrates, in Aristotle, but kind of the modern development of logic, of knowledge, epistemic logic, is going back to the 50s and 60s. Von Wright, Hintika, Lenzen. And there was a long period where people were trying to understand what are the properties of knowledge? How is knowledge different from beliefs, for example? So knowledge has to be true. If you know something, it has to be true. You believe something, it may not be true. What about introspection? If you know something, do you know that you know it? If you don't know something, do you know that you don't know it? And there are lots of philosophical debates about this. You may remember the unknown unknowns of Rumsfeld, which people made fun of, but people like Joe and me say, oh yeah, it makes perfect sense to have this discussion about unknown unknowns. And so this was really the realm of analytical philosophy. But starting sometimes a bit later in the late 60s and then in the 70s, people start to try to take this logical analysis of knowledge and look for applications. And as far as I know, the first one was David Lewis in his book, Convention, a Philosophical Study. Here's the description of the book. Lewis analyzes social conventions as regularities in the resolution of recurring coordination problem situations characterized by interdependent decision processes in which common interests are at stake. This is a mouthful. You probably need to read the whole book to understand even this one sentence description. But Ron Fagin will talk about the use of knowledge in conventions and norms. So we'll come back to it. I think the paper that had more influence on the work on knowledge was by Bob Aumann in 1976, Agreeing to Disagree. And it has to do with this paradoxical phenomenon when you think of trading of securities. So let's say I have some security and I'm selling it to Joe for, I don't know, $10,000. Now, obviously, I think I made a good deal, so I'm making money on it. And Joe thinks he made a good deal, so he thinks it's worth less than 10,000. He's willing to pay 10,000. Unless I need, if I need the money right now to buy a house for my daughter, it may be different. But if it's just trading, why are we willing to trade? Surely I said, if Joe is willing to pay for it, then I shouldn't be selling it. So these are called no trading theorems, and economists start looking at them. And Aumann had this paper with a beautiful abstract. This is the full abstract of the paper. It's called Agreeing to Disagree. 2 people, 1 and 2, are said to have common knowledge of event E if both know it. 1 knows that 2 knows it, and 2 knows that 1 knows it. one knows it, two knows it, one knows it, and so on. So this is common knowledge. And again, we'll hear more about common. This will not be the focus of my talk, but you will see this played an important role, and I know Ron Fagan will talk about it. Now, 1984, in PODC, Principle of Distributed Computing, two papers dealt with the topic. One was by Daniel Lehman, and he wrote that he was inspired by a talk that he heard. He had Aumann give a talk on this. That's what inspired him. And he talks about the muddy children puzzle in his paper. And he used the semantics that really was developed by Hintika. So let's say you have n agents. There's a set of possible worlds, a set of propositions, and in each world, some propositions are true and some are false. And for each agent, you have an equivalence relation that says, I cannot distinguish between these two worlds. And now we can define the so-called the possible world semantics. So a proposition is true in a world W in the structure M if it's true in that state. And agent I knows P if in all the world that agent I consider to be possible, phi is true. Okay, so the equivalence relation define the sort of possible relation. I cannot distinguish my current state from my current world from this other world. So to know it means something is true in all possible worlds. And that's the paper by Lehman. And it was noted, but I don't think it had huge influence. But at the same conference, there was another paper. That's the Halpern and Moses, Common and Common Knowledge in Distributed Environment. And that paper had a huge impact. Not just on us, on Fagan, Halpern, Moses, and Vardi, but on the world as a whole. And now, instead of saying there is an equivalence relation, they gave it a much more concrete interpretation. We have a multi-agent system or distributed system, and each agent has a local state. There's also some environment. Now, what does it mean you cannot distinguish between two global states? You're in the same local state. So now I'm saving this some equivalence relation. It is an equivalence relation, but now it has a much more concrete interpretation. I'm in the same local state, so I cannot distinguish between these two global states. And the goal of that paper, here is what they say in the paper, the relation between common knowledge and a variety of desirable actions in a distributed system is illustrated. Furthermore, it is shown, formally speaking, in practical system, common knowledge cannot be attained. A number of equivariants of common knowledge that are attainable in many cases of interest are introduced and investigated. And both Yoram and Ron will follow up and talk about these kind of topics. And that paper really inspired, even conversation before that really inspired both Ron and me. And Joe's really was the force behind the book that eventually was published in 1995, and then paper edition in 2003, Reasoning About Knowledge, that had described to me. People come to me sometime in conferences asking to autograph their copy of the book. It's a kind of a classic book. And really, I get Joe the credit for the vision. Let's write a book, and then pushing it all the way to completion. Now, if you look at the two editions, there are some differences between the first edition and the paperback edition. And one of them, that the first edition does not cite Friedrich Hayek. And the second does. Somehow we discover Hayek's work. Now, Hayek is very famous for his 1944 book, The Road to Serfdom. And I checked on Wikipedia. It is a very well cited book, 15,000 citations. Wikipedia says, in the book, Hayek warns of the danger of tyranny that inevitably result from government control of economic decision-making through central planning. So obviously, Hayek was looking at what happened in the Soviet Union and was trying to warn the West about don't go that path at all of any kind of government involvement in the economy. Government should stay out of the economy. Now, even more cited, and he got the Nobel Prize in 1974. Here is the quote from the Academy. The Academy is of the opinion that Hayek analysis of functional efficiency of different economic system, notice functional efficiency of different economic system, is one of his most significant contributions to economic research in the broader sense. From the mid-30s, he embarked on penetrating study of the problems of centralized planning. And the book is not that, the book is more of a political manifesto, but the paper that has 22,000 citations, and somehow we missed it when we wrote the first edition of our book, but in the second edition it is cited, is called On the Use of Knowledge in Society. It's from 1945. Where he writes, the peculiar character of the problem of rational economic order is determined precisely by the fact that the knowledge of the circumstances of which we must make use never exists in concentrated or integrated form, but solely as dispersed bits of incomplete and frequently contradictory knowledge which all the separate individuals possess. So we don't have, nobody has a full picture of the economy. Everybody has a little bits and pieces of the economy. And furthermore, he writes, this in turn, this question of how to do what is a rational economic planning or design, this depends on whether we are more likely to succeed in putting at the disposal of a single central authority all the knowledge which ought to be used, but which is initially dispersed among many different individuals, or in conveying to the individuals such additional knowledge as they need in order to enable them to fit their plan with those of others. And of course, Hayek was a huge advocate of the free market. Here is, in a nutshell, go to the font of all knowledge, Wikipedia. Wikipedia summarizes the paper as follows. Hayek's article argues against the establishment of a central pricing board who decides on the cost of things. No, we should leave it to the market, by highlighting the dynamic and organic nature of market price fluctuation and the benefit of this phenomenon. He asserts that a centrally planned economy could never match the efficiency of the open market, because of what is known by single agents is only a small fraction of the sum total of knowledge by all members of society. A decentralized economy thus complements the dispersed nature of information spread throughout society. So this is the argument in favor of free market, is we cannot, central planning never makes sense because you cannot gather all the information. Now, a few years later, George Stigler received the Nobel Prize. And this is from his Nobel lecture. Economists have always known that the extent and accuracy of the knowledge of the economic actor had influence, and often decisive influence on his behavior and foreign behavior of markets. So knowledge is critical to understanding markets. And then he said, even the powerful and luminous essay by Friedrich von Hayek on the use of knowledge in society had not addressed the principle of acquisition of knowledge. Of course, knowledge is important, but how does knowledge flows in society? Hayek did not really address this at all. So for this, I'll go back to Halpern and Moses, which in some sense, I think, was a fair paper. They did start to address it. And there's a concept of distributed knowledge, which also sometimes we call implicit knowledge. But I think distributed knowledge is a better term. And in the paper, the 84 paper, they define D sub G of E. It means the group G, it's a group of agents. The group G has distributed knowledge of phi. Okay, what does it mean? If someone accumulates all the knowledge in the group, then that agent would know phi. And formally, what you do is, remember, we had all this equivalence relation by you are in the same local states. Take the intersection of all these equivalence relations. That means now two states agree. If all the agents are in the same state, only nature, the environment can be different. And now you use the possible word semantics. So D sub G phi is true in the world W. If phi is true in all the possible worlds according to this tighter equivalence relation. And if you study it, you see that this is really essentially behave like the other knowledge. It has veracity, it's always true, and you have introspection, both positive and negative. And it is really the knowledge of an all-knowing observer. If I can read the mind of everybody here, and I will be that. So the distributed knowledge of this group is, if I could read all of your mind, then this is the knowledge that we have. But this kind of all-knowing agent is exactly the kind of thing that Hayek argues against, and I think he's right. And I said, how do I get to read all of your mind? So in fact, in '86, Ron Fagan and I did look at this question. We didn't mention Hayek at all, but we asked ourselves, what can agents actually know in a distributed system? So we assume what they do is they send messages. How can they communicate? Nobody can read people's mind. People can talk. And so, for example, the following state of knowledge we argue in the paper is not attainable. What is the state of knowledge? Agent A does not know P, but it also does not know not P. So it's completely ignorant about the status of P. But it does know that either P is true and B knows it, or P is false and B does not know it. And there is an argument in the paper why this state of knowledge is not attainable. And what we described is from the abstract, we characterize the set of knowledge that are attainable in distributed systems, where communication is done by unreliable message exchange. And the reason is some set of knowledge are unattainable is conservation principle that says information about nature is preserved. So this is the 86 paper, but this would follow up by paper with Fagin and Halperin and myself. We really follow on the paper, and the title of what can machine know in distributed system, I would say today, I would say what can agents know. And what we did in the paper, first of all, we show that the argument in the previous paper was very delicate and relied on certain assumptions. And once you modify this assumption, it breaks down. So now if you want to know what do agents know, it's important to understand exactly what's happening in the system. For example, are they deterministic? Are the agents deterministic or non-deterministic? Is knowledge cumulative, which means process do not forget? Does the environment affect the transition of the system? Just to go back to our experiment, how many people know my phone number? One person. Good for you. Okay. So I told you the phone number, right? Very good. Very good. Now, if you put it all together, we should have said you remember one digit, you remember one digit. So the point is, even if I told you, you see, we don't always have perfect recall. So the question of what is known in the distributed system, we see this question that supposedly Hayek raised. It's important to know what is knowledge, and Stigler says, well, but Hayek really did not clarify what can you know in a multi-agent system. It's a delicate question. It's not a simple question at all. But I'll go more towards the economic side of this. So left cleavage is a kind of open question. We see it depends, we have very formal system, and we show that it's very delicate what can agents know. So we go back to Hayek. Hayek was, there's a miracle, really, it's a miracle of the market. He called it the marvel of marvel. He said the marvel is in a case like that of scarcity of one raw material, without an order being issued, without more perhaps a handful of people knowing the cause, tens of thousands of people whose identity cannot be ascertained by months of investigation are made to use the material or its product more sparingly, i.e. they move in the right direction. A war breaks in the Ukraine, and suddenly people in the Midwest United States drive less. They don't fully understand even what's happening. All they know is, gee, I go to the gas station, it's expensive, so I'm going to drive less. And again, the key thing, you look at Hayek, what does he want? What is it? What was the quest? And we saw this word mentioned before. Which of this system, central planning or free market, is likely to be more efficient? And this will depend on the use of existing knowledge. So efficiency here is the key word. And we saw it all the way to the Nobel Prize citation, efficiency. So what is economic efficiency? So I went to, there's something called Investopedia, which is kind of Wikipedia, but for investment. And this economic efficiency means that goods and factor of production are distributed or allocated to their most valuable use and waste is minimized. Free market advocates argue that through individual self-interest and freedom of production as well as consumption, economic efficiency is achieved and the best interests of society as a whole are fulfilled. And these are two separate things. There is a belief here that efficiency will give us also social optimality. And when you ask economists, okay, what is efficiency? Give me some theorems. And there are people here who probably know much more about it than me. I was referred to the first welfare theorem. And essentially, it says the free market under various technical assumptions that don't always hold in the real world, but at least in this ideal world, it will converge to Pareto optimal equilibrium. And this is what it means. The free market guarantees efficiency. But this says nothing about best interest of society, which we saw from Investopedia. In fact, Investopedia didn't invent this claim. Let's go back to one of who saw the source, Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations, where he writes, as every individual for endeavor as much as he can, both to employ his capital in support of domestic industry, and so to direct the industry that it produce maybe of the greatest value, every individual necessarily labors to render the annual revenue of the society as great as he can. So Adam Smith says, if everyone tries to maximize for him or herself, then society as a whole will benefit. But we understand a little more today about optimization that Adam Smith did not understand. He said, wait a minute, if I just maximize for myself, this is what we call local optimization. Yes, if we all try to optimize, we will end up in some local optimum. But who said this is to be a global optimum, which is what the claim is here? And this has been studied, and I think this is really a paper of foundational significance by Koutsoupissias and Papadimitriou in 1999. And this phenomenon that later people call the price of anarchy. If nobody guides the market, all we know is the market will converge on equilibrium. But there could be many equilibria, and the total social utility could be different between different equilibria. So let's compare the best equilibria in terms of social utility to the worst equilibrium. And that's ratio, and they took concept from comparison approximation algorithms. And they look at that ratio, and they show that it could be actually, there could be an exponential gap depending on the size of the system. So it could be very, very large gap between them. So this myth that the free market guarantee societal optimality is just a myth. The theorem that this price of anarchy tells us the economic efficiency does not guarantee the best interests of society as a whole are fulfilled. This is just simply not true. There was a follow-up paper by Papadimitriou that also look at the same. How does the market reach equilibrium? I decide to raise price, Joe decides to buy a little less, the producer does something, all of this happen. Every such step is a small step. So this is what we call local search. But local search, under some complex theoretic assumption, may take exponentially long to converge. And that means that as the market tries to reach an equilibrium, it may take exponential number of steps. So in reality, markets are never in equilibrium because it takes too long to reach equilibrium. And things change, the weather changes, things change in the world. The world is not stable. The world does not sit and wait for the market to reach equilibrium. So this idea the free market guarantees efficiency, optimality is what some people call economism. It's not economic, it's economism. It's an ideology other than science. Now, of course, we can ask, even suppose we reach social optimum, is it really optimal? What about distribution of wealth? Okay, so here is what happened in the United States over 2 generations. You go back to the early 60s, and the top 1% had about 12% of the income, and the bottom 50% has about 18% of the income. And then you go about this going back to the 60s, so you go back about 50 years. What happens? There is an inversion. Is this good for society? This has nothing to do with the total. Look at distributivity, the distribution of income, and we see growing inequality in this country. And if we want to understand the politics of this country, growing inequality is clearly one of the drivers for growing societal polarization. So I will conclude. Is knowledge useful for society? Certainly. Can we quantify that? I'm not quite sure. I think it deserves further research. Are free markets better than centralized markets? Well, the main thing that we have learned from history is that fully centralized market require a level of coercion that even if they were somehow magically socially optimal, the level of coercion is just totally destructive to society, and many millions of people had to die to make it happen. Are free markets optimal? Certainly not. I think this is a mythology. And I think there is a question that still, if you go back to the research we did 30 years ago on distributed knowledge, and the work on Hayek's argument, which I agree that knowledge is relevant to the function of markets, to me, there's a big question. Can we study knowledge to get better understanding of how markets operate and use it to improve the functioning of markets? Thank you.
Time for a few questions.
It's time to be provocative, so I hope I provoke someone.
What's your phone number?
Text me your questions. Stand up there. You stand up so I can hear you.
Andrew Myers. So you mentioned acquisition of knowledge, and you mentioned acquisition of knowledge, and it seems to me that one of a factor that you didn't quite bring up is that acquiring knowledge is difficult, partly because it's hard to get sincere knowledge. So a benefit of a free market system is that people have to put their money where their mouth is. So in some sense, the knowledge you're getting from their actions is more believable than knowledge simply from asserted preferences.
So the argument is that in some sense the way the market transmit knowledge is not by I'm telling you something, which is, I told you my phone number, you didn't quite remember it, you believe me when I say something, but somehow pricing is objective data, and pricing information is spread throughout the economy. Now this is in some sense this is true. I think it will be very interesting to try to look at pricing as knowledge and understand exactly, okay, this is, because in the paper distributed knowledge, we really focus on sending messages on channels, okay? What if it's, instead of use pricing, can we somehow take pricing as a mechanism to transmit knowledge? I think this deserves study. But the economy doesn't just drive on pricing. I mean, there are a whole bunch, pricing is very determined, there are a whole bunch of people. When the war started in Ukraine and gas prices go up, it's not because immediately there is shortage of supply. It's because people read that, oh, there is a war in Ukraine, there might be a consequence for oil supply. Let's raise the price now. They're not waiting necessarily for everything to happen. So I think knowledge in the economy spread in ways. There are many people who see that's what their job is, to follow information and try to use it to go to end up at pricing. And as we know, it's not just pricing of commodities, of goods, there's also the financial industry, that arbitrage and options and futures, this whole thing. Try to understand how knowledge flows in society. I think to me, you're absolutely right. Pricing is a big deal, but I don't think it's the only factor there. John?
Yeah, so I'm curious.
Can you stand up?
In the so there's a spectrum of how distributed or how centralized knowledge is in these economic structures, right? So you're picking countries that have free markets. So like if I wanted to apply this to think about, say, an organization like Walmart or Apple, sure, not everyone in the organization knows what it's doing, but you would probably argue there's a much greater degree of centralization in Walmart or Apple than there is in a nation state that's running a free market. And yet these are things of comparable complexity. So like how should I think about why different actors take out positions? Like why Apple and Walmart pick one place in the spectrum, and why the economy of a small country picks another place?
No, this argument are made by people have been this argument that all these advocates of free markets also, they want minimal regulation, and they don't even always agree. There has been, if you remember Judge Bork, he came from the school that we should not even do any trust busting, that somehow that concentration of capital is efficiency, in the name of efficiency. But then this very large, by now we have, I think we already, we reach, I think, $2 trillion corporations, and they act essentially like the Soviet Union, right? I mean, there is clearly the much more central planning there. So I think this paradox also deserves some further study. I completely agree with you. And this has been raised. I've seen people raise this point.
Okay, let's thank Moshe.